the majority of these infections are still pretty mild or moderate. Because this is important, because what these public health authorities are now trying to make people believe is that, first of all, this high level of infectiousness will just generate herd immunity. And I'm going to tell you that that is not the case. I will come to this. And secondarily, that in fact, this is fantastic because it does this without increasing the rate of hospitalization and without increasing the rate of mortality. So how do you explain this? Well, the explanation is that the very non-neutralizing antibodies that I've been talking about, the very non-neutralizing antibodies that increase the infectiousness of the virus at the upper respiratory tract, these very same antibodies are responsible for reducing the severity of the disease. We call this at the distant organs. These are organs that are not localized, let's say, at the level of the upper respiratory tract. So in these distant organs, these very same non-neutralizing antibodies that enhance the infectiousness at the upper respiratory tract are going to dampen the symptoms and the level, the severity of disease in distant organs, such as the lungs, the lower respiratory tract. And that is why we are seeing that despite enhanced infectiousness, especially of the vaccinees, their symptoms are still pretty mild or moderate. However, it is important to realize that this is due simply to the non-neutralizing antibodies that at those distant organs are preventing the infection of susceptible cells. So again, what I want to say is that this has to do with immune pressure. So these non-neutralizing antibodies are now preventing severe disease without being able to prevent infection, because the infection is simply going to continue. Right. So in other words, in the first phase of the pandemic, what we have seen is that we had antibodies that to some extent were protecting against the disease without being able to prevent the infection. So the virus could continue to replicate. So the virus has managed to resist this and to overcome the immune pressure on the infectiousness. That is why we have seen dominant propagation of more and more infectious variants. At this stage, Omicron, we have come to a situation where we are seeing that these vaccines are still protecting against severe disease now, no longer against disease, against severe disease by virtue not of neutralizing antibodies, but by virtue of non-neutralizing antibodies. But since these non-neutralizing antibodies cannot prevent the virus from replicating and spreading, the virus will also overcome this immune pressure. This immune pressure is no longer on the infectiousness, as was initially the case, exerted by the neutralizing antibodies. This time, the pressure, the immune pressure, is on the severity of the disease. We call this on the virulence of the disease, and it is exerted by the non-neutralizing antibodies. You can only exert pressure if many people are in that situation, or exerting immune pressure. For example, when you do mass vaccination, because that means that if you do mass vaccination at the beginning, many people will have neutralizing antibodies. That is what puts pressure on the virus. If you continue, like we have been doing, many people will now, because the virus has become resistant to the neutralizing antibodies, many people that have been vaccinated will now be sitting on non-neutralizing antibodies. And therefore you get now immune pressure, because so many people got vaccinated, on viral virulence, because the non-neutralizing antibodies are preventing the virus from causing severe disease and systemic disease in people who are vaccinated. I'm convinced that they will not be able to execute on this, because things will explode so fast and so dramatically that all we will be left with, and I'm not a doom preacher. I wrote this thing of 45 pages, a scientific assessment of how the virus is evolving and how even at a molecular level, you can explain how it is going to overcome the pressure that we are putting and how it will be capable to not only be highly infectious, but highly virulent and even resistant to all kinds of vaccines. So that is what stupid mankind does, is trying to be in control of nature, knowing that there is no stable equilibrium right now. They nevertheless say, we are going to impose that equilibrium. We are going to make sure that we can control this. All they are going to do by signing this treaty, by continuing the mass vaccination, etc., is increasing the pressure on the virus. But I'm saying this pressure is already so tremendously, so incredibly high. I've been predicting that in this thing that I wrote at the very end of March, beginning of April, that I just updated, I've been saying within the next 2 months, I expect an explosion in one of these highly vaccinated countries. And then it will go very, very fast. Of course, what you're saying, it is extremely worrisome. But what I'm saying is that there is another thing that is even more worrisome, and that is now advancing at a much, much higher pace, at a much higher speed than all these discussions and all these negotiations and all this preparation for this WHO treaty, etc., etc. I mean, is this dramatic? I mean, I've been warning not for nothing. I mean, I don't like this. I hate this. I'm not at all into sensation. Not do I like, to come into the media, etc. But so it's not for nothing that I've been warning at the very, very beginning of these mass vaccination campaigns that if we would really involve many age groups, if we would do this across all the age groups, that we would inevitably, end up with a catastrophe, in a sense that this virus is now adapting itself to overcome the immune pressure that is exerted by the vaccinees. The non-vaccinated will not suffer from this. I mean, I'm not discriminating. My heart goes out to all these people who have been highly vaccinated, because their non-neutralizing antibodies are, raising all the time. They put this pressure on the virus. The virus will adapt in a way that it can overcome this, but that it can overcome this pressure. But this pressure only exists in the vaccinees. It does not exist in the non-vaccinated. Whatever we say about the vaccinees and the non-vaccinated, one thing is for sure, that is by biology, that is by nature, is that now the immune status of the vaccinees is very, very different from the immune status of the non-vaccinated. And that is what the virus is going to exploit. And therefore, unfortunately, the scenario will be very different, the outcome very, very different, for the vaccinees compared to the non-vaccinated. We are already seeing this a little bit, whatever people tell about hospitalizations, it's all the non-vaccinated, etc. We are already seeing this a little bit, but it will shift dramatically. It's only one parameter you need to look out for, and that is the number of hospitalizations that will all of a sudden, in one of these highly vaccinated countries, especially in countries that vaccinated very aggressively, will go through the roof, right? When that happens, our healthcare system will crash, right? And then it's chaos, of course. When that crashes, it's chaos. And, then if they like, they can continue to work on their WHO treaty, but it's not going to happen, believe me. I'm very, very serious about this. It's dramatic, of course, but you cannot play with an equilibrium that has been shaped over millions of years by evolution. I mean, I'm now writing a paper on herd immunity, how sophisticated this is, how this is so finely tuned by nature over millions of years. And now all of a sudden we throw a bombshell on this, right? The mass vaccination. Humankind is going to reshape this whole thing. Now the virus is going to backfire. in a way, that is going to be very, very serious and very substantial.
I would argue that they perhaps know this, Dr. van den Bosch. I would
Yeah,
argue
of
that
course,
they know this,
of course,
and that this
of
is
course.
exactly why they're moving forward with this treaty, so that when this
Of
happens,
course.
they can bring in an even greater amount of control and push their
Of course.
pharmaceuticals.
Of course, they are already warning. They are already warning for a high wave of disease and even mortality. First of all, they say, at least in Europe, they say, yeah, probably in autumn. Now they are already saying in summer, right? And because they cannot afford to lose their face, there is no way for them to step back. If one of these guys even dares to take one step back, they're going to lynch them in the street. They cannot go back. They have pushed it too far. So they prefer, to act as mafia, where they prefer to die all together than if one would acknowledge that he or she has made a mistake and tries to explain this. There is no way back for them. But they know, of course, that there is going, to be a huge wave, and to nevertheless maintain their credibility. They say, and therefore we need to continue to vaccinate, because look, the vaccinations are preventing people from getting to the hospital, and in this way we are protecting our healthcare system. They don't dare to acknowledge that this situation is completely unstable. We call this in evolutionary biology, we call this the fitness valley. The virus, once it has selected a mutant that is capable to overcome all this immune pressure, it needs time to become dominant in the population. It needs time to become more fit. It needs time to cross this valley of fitness. And that is the silence before the storm that we are seeing right now. And I mean, they are certainly reading what I'm writing, but when I'm reading what evolutionary epidemiologists are writing, and if you see the type of data that they are collecting, it's very, very clear that the virus is now evolving to this type of mutations, right? It's just that it is not yet obvious, and politicians not understanding anything about biology, and not looking any further than the length of their nose, so to say. They say, yeah, what's the problem? Guys, here, get the shot and don't care, and get your children vaccinated, because it will save lives. It is preventing severe disease, preventing hospitalizations, ignoring that this is just, the virus is just evolving and will not stop. On the contrary, the speed of evolution is just going to increase dramatically. You have seen this,
Yes.
from Delta to Omicron, very, very fast within the family of Omicron, because now the WHO has even decided that those subvariants from Omicron will in their own right be classified as variants of concerns as well.
Yes.
So it goes very, 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 very,
so
very
fast.
For
people to protect themselves. So we're saying that the people that have not been injected will fare better, considering the environment that we've created. What
Absolutely.
do the people that have been injected do now to can they boost their immune systems? Can they obviously stop getting vaccinated?
Yeah, that of course. I mean, not even talking about this anymore. I've already been saying 1.5 years ago that is, vaccination is, that it's that has to stop it, So the key word, the magic word for these people is antivirals. It's the only thing they can do, antivirals. And therefore, early treatment, if you hear people like Robert Malone, like Peter McCullough, they will, the first phase, like also Dr. Chetty, who has also been doing fabulous work in this area, the first thing they all agree upon, all virologists would agree, in the first phase, because before this inflammatory cascades and this cytokine storm starts, in the very first phase, especially in elderly people, for God's sake, give them access to early treatment, and that early treatment consists primarily of antivirals. What I am saying is that, guys, we cannot just do this on an individual level. in order to prevent the virus from further progressing, we need, for the sake of public health, to do this also at a population level. So instead of having these stupid mass vaccination campaigns, we would need to have a mass antiviral chemoprophylaxis campaign in highly vaccinated countries to dramatically diminish the infection rate in the population, because that is what herd immunity naturally and normally does. And we don't have herd immunity. On the contrary, we are increasing the infection rate and the transmission rate in the population. That is what these massive antiviral campaigns could do, is to bring us back to a situation that we had at the beginning of the pandemic. Now, I can tell you, if we were to have the opportunity to go back to the beginning of the pandemic, I think we would probably act very differently, in a sense that, yes, I mean, we would be able to keep this under control by just leaving young and healthy people alone and let them have, why not, the disease if needed, mild or moderate. We know that healthy people, young people, provided they have no comorbidities, they have no predisposing factors like obesity, etc. They're doing exercise, etc. All these things that at the worst case, they will get, and there are always some genetic exceptions, but they will get mild or moderate disease. There is no problem with being in bed for a couple of days. It's the fear that is killing the people, because they think, oh, I get infected, I get symptoms, I'm gonna die. No, it's like flu. Healthy people, you know, young, healthy people, even older people in good health with no predisposing conditions, of course, they will, at most worst case, have mild to moderate disease. They can, by, you know, leaving them alone, they can establish herd immunity very quickly. And then the vulnerable people, of course, in the elderly homes, etc., you have to protect them. But once the herd immunity is in place, thanks to all the other people that have been in contact, I'm not saying you should have, you know, overcrowding and big crowds in closed rooms that are not ventilated, etc. That's pushing it to the extreme, because then you're going to create a high infection rate, a high infectious pressure. But normal contacts, right, leaving people alone, will generate herd immunity. It will take time, could take 6 months, 9 months maybe. But when that herd immunity is in place, you can also completely relax the protection measures for the vulnerable, because the transmission rate is now so low that the likelihood that even vulnerable people will take a viral load that is high enough to make them severely ill is very remote.
Before a global vaccination push comes, and the World Health Organization is literally a vaccine company. That's what I'm going to call them. They don't care for health. Otherwise, they'd be giving the public the information that you're giving. They'd be talking about early intervention. So I guess I'm talking to all of the people that are going to be watching this pre and post May 28th, when all of this is finalized and we see the outcome. Although we are resisting as much as we can, we're writing to politicians. Politicians are starting to speak up as well in Australia, Dr. Van den Bosch, and I'm so glad for it. But anyway, my point is, in the event that this is successful and it does go through, then we need to be advocating even more for early treatment. I just want to clarify with you, your new website is voiceforoScienceAndSolidarity.org. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the website. And yeah, we intentionally put also solidarity, because it's going to become very, very important. Once you start to have the situation where the system gets completely disrupted, it's going to be very, very important that we have, that there is solidarity. People are always thinking, for example, if they lose their job or they can no longer go to campus because there is like vaccine mandates, etc., they're going to die on the street. I mean, if there is solidarity, there is not such a thing like, just dying, because you lost your job and you have no money to to buy food for yourself and for your children. That's why we need solidarity, because there's one thing that is very important for people to know, is that this will not last for a long time. This is the other thing where we completely underestimate the evolutionary capacity of the virus. When this comes, when this huge wave will come, and it could be a large wave, this will not last for years, right? This will be pretty dramatic, cause a lot of chaos, but it's not going to last very long. So all what people, solidarity is important, sharing things with each other and exchanging things will maybe not stimulate the economy dramatically, but it will help people for sure to survive this very, very difficult period that we will be facing, because we are headed to a bad place due to all the to the extreme interventions that are taken at the population level by people who basically don't understand anything about the disciplines that I'm talking about, and that are just doing this out of panic or out of the fact that they have no other idea on how they could correct the dramatic mistakes that they have been making, and they don't even dare to take any steps back for fear of losing their face and for the tremendous consequences that this could have, because, you know, this will backlash a number of actions, potential actions from people, of course. So they have no other choice but to continue to convince people that mass vaccination is the only solution. And remember, at the beginning, it would generate herd immunity, and then it would diminish transmission still, and then it would protect against disease, and all these criteria, we have lost them. They have put the bar lower and lower, and now the only thing that is still left to some extent is protection against severe disease. So are people not understanding that this will change as well? I think a lot of the key opinion leaders, but they all have, of course, very severe conflicts of interest, or realizing this. That is why they are warning for a severe wave in summer, in autumn, well, our summer, which is going to be in 2 months from now, we are in midsummer.
Which makes no sense, right? It makes no sense that we would have severe outbreaks in summer.
No, it makes no sense. No, of course. No, that is what I'm saying. And Maria, there is a few elements that people can understand why the kind of reasoning that I'm proposing, that I'm sharing, is very logical, and it's not about my person. I prefer even to speak maybe even without video. It's not about me, it's about my message. But the fact that we are now seeing, for example, in our regions here, we are plagued by drought right now. It's very dry, the sun is shining. We are already in summer, so to say. It's May, but it's as if we were in the midst of July or so. Despite all this, we have many infections. How can you explain this? Whereas everybody was saying when it is warm and dry, that's not good, favorable for the virus. The reason is, as I was explaining to you, that the infectiousness of the virus is right now no longer determined by the virus alone, but by the combination of the virus with the non-neutralizing antibodies that are making the virus more infectious. That is how we are right now disconnecting viral spread from seasonality, right? That is how we will disconnect the incidence of infection and disease from the age. Normally we are saying younger people are more resistant, etc. That will no longer count. Even when young and healthy and strong people are sitting, on these high titers of non-neutralizing antibodies, in combination with the virus, they will get infected. So far, it's still protecting against severe disease, but I was saying this is going to change. But you see already that even young people, young, strong adolescents, for example, are now getting infected and reinfected, right? Yes. This mass vaccination and the immune pressure that it generated by virtue of the neutralizing and now the non-neutralizing antibodies has, in other words, completely changed the behavior of the virus. Right. And that is something that is very important to understand, Because only when you understand this, you see that it is more than time to end this complete madness and to intervene in a way that is smart, that is logical, and that has a scientific rationale, instead of, the kind of tactics that, these shareholders are now playing. These are just tactics. There is no strategy. There is no objective. They don't even understand. They don't dare to predict what's exactly happening. So already that people, seeing this, that we are doing massive interventions in a global population, with those that are driving this, not understanding anything of what's going on, and none of their predictions have come true. On the contrary, they had to revise all the things that they have been saying. I mean, this is a reason for a high level of suspicion, right? And it's so they don't understand. We can certainly not trust them. And unfortunately, yeah, people, are told a very simple message, don't care, shut up, get yourself vaccinated and get your child vaccinated and you'll be fine. Because look, I mean, it is controlling severe disease, hospitalizations, mortality rates are fine. That's going to stay like this forever, and you don't need to care. But on the other hand, they are predicting a severe wave, in a few months. So, it's completely unlogical.
Oh, and Dr. Van den Bosch, Gates just